Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this very warm evening. I assure you that it will be worth it. It's lovely to see so many of you here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Irene Wellington and I'm based here at the University of London. Specifically, I'm Professor of Manuscript Studies at the Institute of English Studies, so it's my pleasure to host this event. The Institute of English Studies exists to promote and facilitate research around the history of the book, which we define very broadly, and we offer, as many of you know, because you're doing them right now, a range of summer school courses, but also short courses through the year and a master's program in the history of the book. And we have some prospectuses at the back, so over drinks later on, please do pick up one of those. One of the things that we've been really developing over recent years, and particularly in this year, is exploring the intersection between practice-based study and research and more traditional, what we call desk-based research. And that's been one of the really exciting things that's adding a lot of energy to what we do. And there's a lot going on. So the reason I have some props here is to say that the other thing going on down here, and indeed upstairs tonight, is the launch of Spineless Wonders, which is an exhibition arising from a long-running project exploring what books are. And that's got a practical outcome in the form of an exhibition up in the library. So that opens right now, or in about an hour's time, but come back another day and see that. So the ways in which research and practice can inform each other are manifold, and many of you will be already convinced of that. But in my own research earlier this year, I was reading a diary from a great manuscript scholar and collector, a chap called Sidney Cockerell, whose diaries are now in the British Library. And in the volume for 1950, I came across his meeting with a woman called Irene Wellington, which I meant to go back and check my notes. I'm pretty sure this happened at Kensington Palace, which seems very appropriate for this evening, where she was giving a demonstration of her calligraphy. So it's just one of those serendipitous things where you find your research interacting with other things and other partnerships. And I'm really, really pleased tonight to be able to welcome the Irene Wellington Trust. Many of whose members are here tonight, and I'm going to hand over to Enrich, who's going to introduce our speaker. So, thank you, Edward. I think that's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Laura. So, my name is Edward Waits, and I'm the chair of the Irene Wellington Educational Trust. As Laura said, Irene was a foremost calligrapher. She was born in 1904 and she died in 1984. She was a student of Edward Johnston's at the Royal College of Art. She was one of his favourite students, and she went to live in Edinburgh for a short period of time. Was reasonably unhappily married. Married a second husband, Hubert Wellington, came down to South, and was an absolutely beautiful calligrapher. She taught. The trust was founded after she died by two of her students, who had gone to become very illustrious calligraphers themselves. Some of you will know Donald Jackson and Anne Heckle set up the trust when Irene died in 1984. And the trust has gone on since then. It's a very, very small trust. The mission of the trust is to keep alive the spirit of Irene. We do actually look after some of her work. A lot of her work is at the Craft Study Centre in Farnham. So if you're interested in finding out more about her and her work, I urge you, I'm also the chair of trustees of the Craft Study Centre, I urge you to go and look at the work where you can handle the work very unusually. But the trust looks after some of her pieces. And we have about £7,000 in our account, and we try and do various things to keep the spirit of Irene alive. And we're very happy to collaborate with the Institute of English Studies tonight to host a lecture, which Tim, who is a trustee of the trust, is very generously giving. Many of you will probably know Tim. We are really privileged to see his work today. Some of it's in reproduction on the table at the back of the room. So after the talk, I really would encourage you to go and look at that closely. Tim does a lot of work for the College of Heralds and the Crown Office, creating the most wonderful illuminated addresses, which you'll see represented today. He trained at Reigate School of Art and studied on the Society of Scribes and Illuminators Advanced Training Scheme and has been practicing ever since then. Finally, he was awarded an MBE in this recent honours, so we have a cake to celebrate. I encourage you to stay after the talk, and I'm very happy to hand over to Tim.
Thank you, Edward. Thank you to you all for coming this evening. And thank you to the Irene Wellington Educational Trust for sponsoring this talk this evening. On the 10th of September 2022, just 2 days into his reign, King Charles III convened his accession council at St James's Palace and was handed a pen. What happened next has gone down in history as Pengate. Perhaps more historical interest were the two documents in front of the king, on which he signed his name for the first time as Charles Rex. These were the oaths by which the king pledged to uphold the security of the Church of Scotland. They carried great religious and constitutional significance. They are most interesting to us this evening for the fact that they were handwritten. Identical scrolls, which were my work, were functional rather than decorative. They were written on humble sheepskin parchment rather than calfskin vellum. They were not illuminated. Nevertheless, in the United Kingdom and parts of the Commonwealth, beyond any other administration, handwritten documents are still part of the regular business of state and have real legal authority. This tradition has continued unbroken for around a millennium, and survives to this day, albeit in a much diminished form. This evening I'd like to give you a brief overview of the functions and history of these documents, how the work of more recent calligraphers, including my own, fits into this tradition. Now, the history of Western calligraphy is often divided into two phases. First is the Middle Ages. Bibles, psalters and books of hours were handwritten, various calligraphic scripts, and often illuminated. This came to a sudden halt in the 15th and 16th centuries, the advent of the printing press and the Protestant Reformation. The second phase started in the late 19th century, the work of William Morris in the arts and crafts movement, who revived the use of the quill or the chisel-edged pen. And this was taken up by Edward Johnston, who you can see here. And rather than the inflexible pointed metal nib, Johnston revived scripts derived from medieval and Renaissance manuscripts. As you can see here, the round-hand foundational script based on the Anglo-Saxon Ramsay Psalter. And this is the basis of much modern-day calligraphy. So the received version of events is that between the Renaissance and the arts and crafts movement, nothing important happened from a calligraphic point of view. However, I believe that there's another narrative which intersects with, but also challenges this version of events. They were handwritten and illuminated documents, in particular royal charters and letters patent, that proliferated throughout the Middle Ages and survived the Reformation and gave work to scribes and illuminators throughout the subsequent centuries. And these lead to the continuous and living tradition of one title. They're often hidden in archives, they're little studied and underappreciated. The trajectory was far from smooth. The quality of this work also declined towards the early 20th century, and there was an injection of vitality from Edward Johnston and his pupils and followers. This group shows some of this tradition through the livery companies or guilds of the City of London. Drapers' Guild was given their first royal charter by Edward III in 1364. Subsequently, they had 7 other royal charters, until the latest one which I did for them in 2008. I painted the royal ciphers of the sovereigns who gave the royal charters in the border. And the double cipher of William and Mary and the Art Deco cipher of Edward VIII. Just to say, I haven't shown the Great Seal in most of the images that you're going to see because it takes up quite a lot of space, so I thought it would be better to enlarge the charters rather than show that. And where the image is my own work, I put my initials TN to the caption. Letters patent are official public documents issued by the monarch, granting rights, titles, or status to individuals or corporations. Patent in Latin means lying open for all to view. They are either handwritten or printed on vellum. They are sealed with the Great Seal, which acts as the official signature of the sovereign. They are rarely actually signed by them. The most basic printed format is shown on the left, and the simply decorated handwritten one on the right. Calfskin vellum is always used for these official documents, though they often used to be on parchment, which is normally sheepskin. The letters patent is an open letter from the monarch addressing no subjects. It begins with what's known as a salutation, the name of the monarch, and ending in greeting. The body of the text then contains the decision of the monarch to grant the titles and privileges that are detailed therein. It ends with a part called the attestation, which includes the date of the year of the monarch's reign and the place from which the patent is issued, usually Westminster. Letters patents are a rare example of royal prerogative. They do not require the consent of Parliament. In practice, they are administered by the Ministry of Justice, who administers the Crown Office at the House of Lords. The text records that a royal warrant has been issued to the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Justice, whose name appears at the end of the document. Letters patent covers many different types of document: appointments to the House of Lords, Supreme Court and the College of Arms, creation of royal titles, the elevation of towns to city status, royal charters, that's amongst others. Royal charters are granted by the sovereign on the advice of the Privy Council. History dates back to the 13th century and have their origins in Anglo-Saxon times. It's still used to establish significant organisations: boroughs, universities, learned societies, livery companies, trade guilds. Statistically, they're often the largest and the most decorated of letters patent. They are treasured as foundation documents by their recipients. When a chartered body needs to modernise or change their rules, they request a supplemental charter. And this text refers to all the previous royal charters by the names of the monarchs. This is for the Clothworkers Livery Company, given their first charter by Henry VIII. This is number 9. Increasingly rare for the full text to be written out on one skin vellum. In this case, it was around 70 centimetres square. Letters patent were traditionally written out in continuous long horizontal lines. When I write them, I retain the clauses dividing the text into readable sentences. If necessary, it can be divided into 2 columns as here. And all this involves considerable planning and preliminary layout work. It's now normal for royal charters to be smaller, more like 55 centimetres square. The text carries on over onto subsequent pages of vellum, either handwritten or printed. This had already been done for centuries in the case of very long texts, as I'll show you. The sheets of vellum are then tied together with coloured cords, and the Great Seal is affixed to hold it all together. Decoration of a royal charter features the name and titles of the sovereign, traditionally enlarged, coloured or gilded. The first initial of their name is usually gilded, and decorated with elements of the royal arms or badges, such as the floral badge of the United Kingdom, or in this case the royal helm and crest. And this initial often included in the past a portrait of the king or queen in throned estate, in the first image that you saw. The royal arms, either in full, or in this case what's known as the lesser arms, without the crest, is in the centre at the top. In the past, the border decoration would also be focusing on royal heraldry, with shields and badges surrounded by foliage. Now it's more conventional to refer to the organisation who've been awarded the charter, commission the document. In this case, the cloth workers have included their coat of arms in the centre, the shield, and the griffin supporters at the bottom of either side. And then the bands are in the livery colours of the company, black and gold, lettered with the motto. And in between are the plants used in the clothworking trade. And I also included the chemical structure for nylon. At the College of Arms, I'm a heraldic artist and calligrapher with the titles Herald, Painter and Scrivener. Been there for my whole working life. Next year it will be 40 years. The College is the heraldic authority for England, Northern Ireland, Wales, and much of the Commonwealth. The main work of the College is the design of new coats of arms by the heralds. They are granted by the Kings of Arms. They have been delegated this authority by the Crown to issue the documents which are known as grants of arms. These are handwritten and painted vellum scrolls. They also officially let us patent granting arms. They are known as patents within the college. Here's an example. The salutation of a grant of arms begins to all and singular, that is, to everyone. The name of the titles of the sovereign appear at the end. Their coat of arms is also at the top. Painting of the new coat of arms is an essential part, along with the text which describes coat of arms in the heraldic language or blazon. This one is for Baron Darcy, who was originally a Labour peer, now is an independent in the House of Lords. A surgeon. He was born in Iraq of Armenian heritage, hence the distinctive Armenian cross. He studied at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, hence the harps and shamrocks. And he also has the Palace of Westminster portcullis, coat of arms. As a peer, he has a baron's coronet. He is entitled to supporters, which are the animals who hold the shield on either side. He's the Knight Commander of the British Empire, which is the circlet around the shield, and a member of the Order of Merit. So hanging from the bottom of the coat of arms, you have the Order of Merit and the British Empire. Baron Darcy carried the armills or bracelets at the coronation. In painting and writing grants of arms, there's a traditional division of labour within the College of Arms still. Heraldic artists paint the arms, then the scriveners had the text. I'm fairly unusual in doing all the work. This was also the case for letters patent. In the past, different craftsmen would write the text, paint the initials, and illuminate the borders. Magna Carta, as you know, means Great Charter. This period, royal charters were not decorated, but were functional documents. The Salisbury Cathedral copy of the Magna Carta is unimpressive in size, between A2 and A3 size. It includes an immense amount of dense, tiny writing. This was for the sake of economy, comes close to the edges. The vellum was an expensive material. The original copies of the Magna Carta were written by King John's clerks at the Royal Chancery in Westminster, presumably very quickly, to enable them to be distributed around the kingdom. The Salisbury copy was believed to be written by a scribe from the Dean of Salisbury's own household. When I came to write this facsimile, I enlarged it slightly to aid legibility. Got a copy of my work at actual size at the back of the room there. Carefully followed the transcript to ensure understanding the actual words, not just copying the characters. It was a translation of the actual words. Accuracy was and still is critical in these official documents. Although I imagine I was more comfortable and the work complicated, I did feel a real affinity with the original scribe. The detail. This is the salutation beginning with the name of the king and his titles, much the same as would begin a royal charter to this day. The Gothic script of the Salisbury Magna Carta is fairly legible, very tightly compressed. With most Gothic scripts, and the letters and lines are close together. There are also many contractions. Where letters are missed out, this is indicated by horizontal lines above and below the line of text. Writing lines were ruled on the vellum using lead point. Of course, they would have used a quill for this work. During the reign of Edward III, for the first time, English royal letters patents and royal charters were illuminated, probably in emulation of the kings of France, where some magnificent examples still exist. This is a royal license granting property and land in Ripon, Yorkshire, to support the work of a chaplain. The initial shows a bishop addressing his congregation. With balloon-like illuminations which fill the ascenders along the top line. Script is a version of court hand, a cursive form of Gothic black letter. Distinct ascenders, the F's and the S's, pointing tapering descenders. Crescent-shaped curves above some of the letters. And it was acquired by the British Library last year. This is one of a pair of almost identical royal charters. The illuminator William Abel recorded of being paid in the Eton College audit roll £1, 6 shillings and 8 pence for the royal charter. Recipients at Eton College had commissioned the decoration themselves from this professional illuminator. It's still customary for royal charters. Abel was an important City of London illuminator, books as well as documents, and was a member of the Stationers' Guild. The decoration of the King's College version shows the Assumption and Coronation of the Virgin at the top, and Nicholas, royal heraldry, and in the initial, the King is kneeling, accompanied by members of the Houses of Lords and Commons. He's holding the royal charter that he's granting. With elaborate penwork, particularly interlacing strapbar and cadelles or parallel Gothic flourishes. This is a regular feature of the decoration of initials of the name and titles of the monarch. Gothic scripts for headings and texts of charters survived well into the 20th century. Script is in an early form of Batard, cursive form of Gothic. As you probably know, there are many definitions for the different forms of Gothic lettering. The Tudor period was a period of great splendour and innovation in royal charters. With a need to assert royal authority, the visual image and identity of the monarch was very important to Tudor sovereigns. There were also many new educational institutions, grammar schools, university colleges, also new forms of Renaissance-style decoration, where the script was still a version of Gothic. In contrast, Henry VI kneeling before the saints and angels, Elizabeth I now has the ultimate authority, supported by allegorical figures of justice and prudence. Elizabeth, or the college, grew upon the most skilled miniature, or limner, Nicholas Hilliard, to design and probably execute parts of this initial in 1584. Again, this is part of a pair. The first one was done for Emmanuel College, Cambridge, which is the one on the right. And the second, almost identical one, was made for Ashbourne Free Grammar School a year later. Hilliard was perhaps working with scribes and illuminators on the Royal Chancery. He had several disputes with Painters Stainers Guild, and authority over illuminators and heraldic artists within the City of London. This magnificent letters patent is also attributed to Hilliard, and contains portraits of James I and Prince Henry. It has also been suggested that Isaac Oliver, who was Hilliard's successor as a miniature painter, may have also done the work. The heraldic decorations, the military and tournament paraphernalia, possibly suggesting a heraldic connection, suggest Edward Norgate, who was also a portrait miniaturist, was the author of a book called The Art of Limning, Illumination. He became a clerk to the signet in the Court of Chancery. This is a title that still exists in the Crown Office. Subsequently became a herald at the College of Arms. Official letters also came the other way, sent to Elizabeth I and the Stuart and Hanoverian successors by other rulers outside Europe, or part of diplomatic and trade communications. There's a strong relationship between Elizabeth and the Ottoman sultans, and they sent her upwards of 30 letters. The magnificence of Ottoman illuminations was impressive for the English court. This is an example of a tugra, the official cipher of Sultan Murad III. Tugras consist of loops, 3 vertical flags, extensions to the right. The name and titles of the Sultan are contained inside. The actual documents are long and narrow, up to 3 feet in length. On the right is an illuminated letter from James I from the Malay Sultan. That was interesting for me to find out as a new centre of Islamic illumination, which I wasn't aware of. In 1591, Elizabeth's ambassador to the Ottoman court, Edward Barton, wrote to the Queen's Chancellor, Lord Burleigh, quote, "I suggest your honour would give order that a little more cost were bestowed upon the gilding or painting of the Queen's letters, that they being not able to read them, these might take pleasure to see the care taken in their outward form." This might sound slightly condescending to non-Westerners, was a competitive response to the documents we've just seen, and an attempt to make English documents reflect the splendour and international importance of the Elizabethan court. Edward Norgate was employed under James I and Charles I for this very purpose. And he wrote out letters not only to the Ottoman sultans, but also to the Mughal, Persian and Russian emperors. This illuminated letter is probably his work, and was sent from James I to Sultan Osman II, appointing Thomas Roe the ambassador in 1621. He used an elegant, closely spaced italic script, rather than the usual Gothic. The Renaissance-style border decoration, which contains neither heraldic or figurative elements. I was interested to discover that letters pattern continued under Oliver Cromwell. This document concerns rights of ownership over land by Emmanuel College, was still considered worthy of decoration. Penwork of the O includes intricate struckwork patterns. Drawings and the heraldry were done in plumbago as a form of graphite, used in this period for drawings on vellum. The portrait of Cromwell is recognisable, based on official, other than more symbolic enthroned images of kings and queens previously seen. This set the fashion for letters patterned in the future. Black and white letters patterned were not new, became more common. Perhaps grisaille was appropriate for Puritan England. Eventually, black and white drawings came engraved borders, letters patterned over the next 3 centuries. Text is in English, but not Latin. It became used regularly, but not exclusively after this period. The script, again, is a form of cursive Gothic, known as engrossing script. I'll turn to that shortly. As in the Tudor period, the Restoration period under Charles II showed a need to reassert royal authority, splendour of portraiture and decoration. Border decoration is in Baroque style and has continued on royal charters and letters patterned into the Georgian period. Shell or powdered gold was used lavishly for the heading, foliage, and the heraldry in the borders and the lettering. As with Cromwell, the portrait is a likeness, rather than the enthroned figures shown previously, and it's based on a miniature by Samuel Cooper. The stationer's company who commissioned this document were involved in the book and illustration trade, so possibly explains the high quality of this document. Charles II wanted to rein in the parliamentary sympathisers of the City of London, so he enforced many new royal charters on the livery flags. These were revoked and new ones were issued under William and Mary. There's a detail of the script. It's actually from another similar charter. I'll discuss that style shortly. In 1662, an office was created within the Court of Chancery, similar to the work that Norgate had been doing. It's called the Embellisher of Letters, for the writing and illuminating of diplomatic correspondence with the rulers of the East. The office holder was given a fee of £10 per document. For the reign of Queen Anne, it became an annual salary of £60. In practice, the office holder probably oversaw the office and employed others to write and illuminate the documents. The decoration is in the same flamboyantly Baroque style that we saw in the previous example, showing perhaps the overlap of different craftsmen. Text is in English, and the script in elegant italic rather than the usual Gothic. Rather disturbing to modern eyes, there was no expectation to fit complete words along the heading and the names and titles of the King and Queen. Many royal charters were issued under William and Mary to institutions in the colonies as well as Great Britain and Ireland. The decoration was often engraved and printed onto the parchment or vellum. Text was still written by hand, in form of square Gothic or engrossing script. This design set out the tone for royal charters for the next 200 years. In spite of its rich holdings, the Bank of England was granted a royal charter with a printed border in 1694. Nevertheless, the skill of flourishing around the initials is impressive. It recalls the penwork of medieval charters. Two legal scripts are shown here from the late 17th century. And they are identified in George Bicken's book, Engraved Calligraphy, from the 18th century. The Gothic script is called square text, although it's actually quite rounded, compared to the narrow vertical script of medieval charters. The engrossing hand is similar but more cursive. For example, you have a zigzagging form of M, which has fewer strokes and pen lifts, allowing text to be written at speed. This style continued until the 20th century. Copperplate script, written with a pointed pen, was seldom used on letters patterned, but was frequently used on deeds and indentures. This was possibly because the fine pen strokes were not considered sufficiently bold for a ceremonial document. Many examples exist of this engraved printed border on different royal charters. Decoration has dense acanthus scrolls and cherubs, which all but swamp the heraldic elements. And at the top are female personifications of Britannia, justice, and peace. All the lion and unicorn were rather lovely, like a pair of dogs playing in the park. This is an example where you have several different pieces of vellum. You can see they're laced together with the cords at the bottom. So the most important one, the work Victoria by the grace of God, is actually the bottom. And they would roll the others forward, so you could reveal each page one at a time. So the page that you're seeing at the front is actually the last page. So nowadays, if you had several pages, you would have the top page would be the first page of the letters pattern, which would be the illuminated page. The less important ones would be behind it. It's a peerage pattern. The lettering of the heading is crude, the decoration brash but well executed. The text is in scrawly handwriting, showing just how low standards are from. Rooted engraved letters pattern to George V, find who could be called the Royal Highness, still regularly a contentious issue within the royal family. Continues the Victorian tradition with the allegorical engravings. However, after the First World War, Lord Napier, who was the enlightened secretary to the Lord Chancellor's Department, was aware of recent advances in calligraphy and illumination and decided to improve the quality of letters patterned. Initially, he chose calligraphy students from the Royal College of Art, eventually settling on the more reliable calligrapher, Rayleigh Hewitt. Hewitt has studied with Edward Johnston and was important for reviving the techniques of raised gold leaf on gesso, He devised styles of illumination based on medieval and Renaissance style. Square text Gothic script was still considered appropriate, although many other calligraphic scripts were by this time available. Willie Hewitt's assistant, Ida Henstock, also worked on letters pattern for many years. While calligraphy was widening all the time in style and scope, writing and decoration of letters pattern was considered a sought-after and prestigious occupation for calligraphers throughout the 20th century. Ida Henstock was succeeded by Dorothy Hutton. By the time she worked on this letters pattern, her work had developed an elegant simplicity, particularly in the illuminated initial, where she allowed raised gold to create heraldic designs in silhouette. And we come to Irene Wellington. The artistic quality and integrity of her work have given inspiration to many calligraphers. The Irene Wellington Educational Trust aims to encourage her example through education. Wellington, as Edward mentioned, was a pupil of Edward Johnston. Submitted this piece with vigorous italic script at the Crown Office in 1950. In contrast to the delicacy of the previous examples, vitality was just ahead of its time and sadly did not find favour. Irene Wellington was inspired by the work of Anglo-Saxon manuscript illuminators. For example, the initial double-stroke letter G, the coloured penwork of the lion and the acanthus designs. This is not a letters pattern. Irene Wellington's coronation address from the London County Council. It took its cue from these documents. The enlarged heading, decorated initial, heraldry and the borders. Within this, she worked in a highly original way, combining different scripts, sizes and weights, including the delicately written text as part of the borders. The meaning was also enhanced and personalised with statements taken from the young Queen's speeches of dedication. The new text is written in the unsealed script, somewhere between the upper and lower case, expressing strength and vitality. All decorations, again, are inspired by the Winchester school of Anglo-Saxon illumination. They feature lime tree flowers, would be in flower in London in June, the month of the Coronation. Irene's personal response to words, harmonious balance of text and decoration, visual symbolism beyond the formality of heraldry, are her great contributions. Have always had a strong influence on me. Next to the work of Donald Jackson, a pupil of Irene Wellington, selected by Dorothy Hutton for his skills in illumination. He became one of the greatest living calligraphers, working on letters pattern for almost 50 years, often at very short notice. And he's also written the first handwritten illuminated Bible since the Reformation. The Crown Office at this time was more open to innovation. Jackson created playful versions of the initial E for Elizabeth. You can see the influence of Irene Wellington in the way that he's used penwork, design and draw out the lines and the various decorations. Donald Jackson calligraphy has enormous strength and liveliness, combining tradition and modernity. The Royal Charter for the Crafts Council has an abstract pattern of triangles in the border, boldly placed at the edges of the document, so the overlapping membranes of vellum build up to form a rich design. And the margins, or the empty spaces, are brought inside the border, leaving space around the text. Joan Pillsbury was another pupil of Irene Wellington, and worked on letters pattern for many years from the 1960s. Her style was elegant and understated, but has a distinct personality. She wrote this one for her fellow Suffolk resident, the composer Benjamin Britten. Beads around the initial form the landscape around Aldborough, but they also have a calligraphic quality picked up in the flourishes of the text. Lovely person, became a great friend of mine. I was taken on by the Crown Office as Scribe and Illuminator on Jones' retirement, Donald's recommendation in 2006. At this time, each live peer was given a vellum letters pattern illuminated by hand. I did many over the next few years, often in batches and at short notice. You can see the royal arms held by the lion in the initial E. And you can also see I'm coming from a more heraldic background, rather than the calligraphic of Donald Jackson and Irene Wellington. In 2010, government spending cuts. As a result of the government spending cuts, the Ministry of Justice was forced to cut costs, and life peerages fell victim. Printed heading using Old English black letter font, returned to 19th century ways, makes overnight the handwritten and illuminated headings of the Crown Office scribes. I do think the current design is somewhat improved from this. There are 4 scribes who carry out regular work for Crown Office documents. For illumination, they call upon me or Andrew Jameson. There's beautiful letters pattern granting royal titles, much influenced by medieval work. Fortunately, there are other types of letters pattern which I work on, including royal charters. I've done around 30 of these over the last 20 years. About half of them have fully illuminated borders. And this is a rare example where the Queen signed letters pattern herself. It also says in the line along the bottom, the decoration and the borders was derived from the royal badges. This was the consent for the marriage of Prince William and Catherine Middleton. When Prince Harry married Meghan Markle in 2018, he was granted the title including Duke of Essex. Decoration in the border includes the sword with a belt, coronet, cap of estate, and the gold rod which the royal duke would be given by a king or queen. Text. I'm sure you've all watched the Sussex's Netflix documentary or Meghan packing up Frogmore Cottage. You've seen the letters patterned. Meghan clearly asking Harry, should we keep it? Chuck or cash it in? The first illuminated letters pattern granted by new King Charles III gave the town of Bangor in Northern Ireland the title of a city, according to the wishes of the late Queen in her Platinum Jubilee year. The Queen's name is written in uncial script, and the gold decoration in Celtic knotwork. Royal arms of King Charles show the new heraldic crown. The shape of the arches is different from Queen Elizabeth's crown, which was based on St Edward's crown. This type is called the Tudor crown, non-imperial. It was originally used by King Henry VIII, and last used by the King's grandfather George VI. Here it's being presented by Princess Anne, Princess Royal. This is the Royal Charter for the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies. Text is written out in full. The decoration combines Western styles and Western styles and techniques with Islamic. This includes Islimi or Rumi, which are the spiralling plant forms known as arabesque in the border. The flourishes of the script are based on the shapes of Arabic and Ottoman calligraphy, seen earlier in the Tukras, Murad III. This Royal Charter was for the Royal Company of Scientific Instruments. I wanted to reflect the different branches of science in the background. The technique of sponging, apply the paint. And the scientific instruments I chose to include are modern ones rather than historical ones. And I've done the work in palladium, which is a silvery form of platinum, and a tarnish. So on the bottom of the left-hand border, you've got Faraday, representing figure. These are the supporters of the coat of arms, by the way, representing physics against the magnetic field. And then on the right, you've got Newton, representing astronomy in front of the Milky Way with a telescope. And the rainbow colours going around the border represent Newton's spectrum. The detail shows the section in which I wanted to represent human biology. We've got the neurons of the brain and a thermometer. The curving white line going through the background is fibre optic cable. It's an interesting learning curve for me. I'm not particularly scientifically confident. I'm going to show you a few slides showing the process of working on a Royal Charter. This is the supplemental Royal Charter of the Vertical Company of Cooks. And this was the first Charles III Royal Charter. The first image is the rough. I wanted to combine contemporary and traditional styles and techniques. And again, I was using sponging with resists. The cooks, I wanted to represent cooking. I decided to use herbs and spices rather than meat and veg. I thought would make an interesting way of preparing food and just eating it up. Company were happy with my idea. As you can imagine, these commissions often involve committees, compromises, many people wanting to, too many cooks, literally. Text I just pasted in and Elizabeth II in to show them what it would look like, and this is my design. Got a picture of the coat of arms of the Company of Cooks in the corner there. So as you've seen, rather than painting the full coat of arms at the corner of these Royal Charters, I quite like splitting it up into bits, having the shield on their own, then the supporters either side at the bottom, maybe the crest at the top. They have plenty of versions of their full coat of arms already in their livery board. The first thing to do working on the actual Royal Charter is to stretch a piece of vellum, wet it on the back, and then glue it around the edges onto a board. This keeps it flat while I'm working on it. It allows for the moisture in the colours and the gilding, which is quite concentrated around the edges, and it stops it cockling. I normally use italic script. It's legible, flexible, can be flourished and decorated, or plain and formal. As I've told you, there's very much careful planning involved in laying out the script. And first of all, I type out the text, I cut and paste it to achieve even lines, try and achieve right alignment of the lines as well. I have to avoid widows, which is a word on its own, and also splitting words, especially names. You can also see around the edge there, I've masked off certain areas before I apply the sponging. So the pieces of lettering here are just rough pieces of paper which I've taped on to protect the surface, which I've already written on. Sponging I thought was appropriate here because it gives a powdery effect, which I thought was suitable for herbs and spices. It also gives subtle colour mixtures and a more modern effect than washes and detailed painting. It's also drier to work around the edges of the document. As I explained, quite a lot of moisture going in certain concentrated areas, working into the vellum. And in this case, I've done 2 layers of sponging, an undercoat, which is the pale colour, and I removed the mask and then added another top layer. So it's quite a labour-intensive process, requires careful planning. Here I've removed masks, started to add a little bit more colour and detail into the herbs and spices with a sponge. So just going from bottom left, you've got coriander, and then in the corner you've got vanilla with the dark brown pods, and you've got sage at the top, and then ginger. So, which is a mixture of plaster, lead, sugar and fish glue, is painted on. This is hygroscopic, which means it attracts moisture. It becomes sticky when it's breathed on. Gold leaf is applied. Here we are in the gilding process. Again, I've carefully masked off around what I'm doing. Quite easy if you're breathing on something to make it rather sticky, and then you might damage the writing and painting. As well as the letter C, I always gild the first letter, the initial of the sovereign's name. They gilt the metallic elements of the royal arms, in other words, the crown and the unicorn's chain, the garter. So now I've added on the finer painting, heraldry, got the floral badge of the United Kingdom, the rose, the thistle and the shamrock, and the pheasant crest of the Cook's Company, and then the columbine, which I took from their coat of arms, which is the continuously running element through the design. Here is the completed Royal Charter. When I finished it, I cut it from the board, cut the vellum off the board around the edges. It should remain quite flat. Then it's handed over to the Crown Office for the cords and the seal to be on. In 2024, the King granted the title Somerset Herald, the College of Arms. The recipient is with us this evening. Previously, I'd painted the Queen in the initial E, the letters pattern for one of the heralds at the College of Arms, showing her as she appeared at the state opening of Parliament in the House of Lords, with the imperial state crown. This time I was commissioned to paint King Charles at the Coronation, wearing St Edward's crown and the stole royal, the scarf around him which is my design. There's a full-size copy of the letters pattern at the back. The initial is around about 8 centimetres, 3 inches high. These are some of many of the commissions I've done for designs for the new King and Queen. These are the 6 I consider probably the most important. We've got the Royal Cypher, the new version of the Royal Arms, £5 crown coin, which was issued to celebrate the coronation by the Royal Mint. Old Royal, which I just told you was the design I did for the scarf that the King wore in the coronation ceremony. The Great Seal of England, which has very recently been, which is going to be on the bottom of the letters patent. And the Coronation, I'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. Great privilege and a challenge to be asked by God, King of Arms, to design a new Royal Cypher for King Charles III. He chose this design from 10 different designs which I had submitted to him, different scripts, the Roman alphabet, italic and flourish copperplate styles. Quite difficult to achieve a balance between the different letter shapes. They're repeated and reflecting curves, the C and the R, the numerals and the spaces. Very happy with the result. You can see it has the Tudor crown. Ewan Clayton, who's another trustees of the Irene Wellington Educational Trust, designed the Queen's Cypher. See on the pair of throws, he did the one on the right, which is a more Irish copperplate style. These are versions of the new Royal Arms of the United Kingdom, colour in black and white. So the full version of the Royal Arms on the left will be used by the Palace and for royal warrants, such as the royal warrant holders and their premises. Black and white version of that on the right. And then you have the lesser arms used by the government. So you'll see them on official paperwork, on government buildings. Eventually they'll be used on passport. The government minister giving a speech, might be a little plaque on the front of the lectern with that version. This is the new Great Seal. In the 1580s, Nicholas Hilliard designed and collaborated in making the Great Seals of Elizabeth I. Great honour to follow in his footsteps again, as he was also an illuminator of the letters patent. My design for the Great Seal was the reverse, so it's like the Great Seal. It was commissioned by the Royal Mint for the new Royal Arms. I'm looking forward to the time the Great Seal of Charles III will be attached to a letters patent, which I have written and illuminated. Now we come to the Coronation Roll. The Coronation Roll is a handwritten official record of the ceremonies of the coronation. They've been written for every monarch. The oldest to survive is Edward II. All of them do survive. I was commissioned to write and illuminate the title page. Calligrapher Stephanie von Werthen-Gill, in the audience this evening, wrote the main text in copperplate, a total of 21 metres of paper, sewn together at intervals. It was an extraordinary feat. Paper was chosen instead of vellum, unfortunately in my opinion. It would be better for Stephanie to write on in copperplate, apparently for conservation reasons. The illumination, using shell gold or powdered gold, with the royal arms at the top, and St Edward's crown, which was used for the coronation, with the floral emblems of the United Kingdom. And the coronation roll is currently on display at the National Archives in Kew, along with the Edward II coronation roll. Just the little one at the front there, very, very small. It's only probably 5 or 6 inches wide. It was a lovely occasion in May last year. Stephanie and I were invited to meet the King and Queen of Buckingham Palace, and they were presented with the coronation. The quotation about me is from a BBC article about the coronation roll, alluding to the fact that my work is often anonymous. At least recently described by a friend as the heraldic Banksy. Among my colleagues as trustees of the Irene Wellington Educational Trust are 5 other professional calligraphers, all of whom are very highly renowned, all very different from each other, and they all have skills which I could not aspire to. Equally, they would freely admit that they are not specialists in gilding heraldry in formal documents. Though I've described my work as a living tradition, there are very few calligraphers with the training, skills and ambition to carry out this work today. Throughout my working life, there have been further threats from politics, spending cuts, ignorance and indifference, and also the lack of educational opportunities. And its future, sadly, is less assured now than ever before. We can only hope that others will come along to keep the tradition alive. However, I am grateful to the craftspeople past and present who have encouraged and inspired me, and for the opportunities I've been given to contribute to this historic and living tradition.